Hello, and welcome back for a class today on the agricultural age, industrial age, and the information age. Back when I was in high school in the early 70s, I read a book by Alvin Toffler. I remember being in high school and they made us read books. And one of the books that they made us read was Alvin Toffler and what was called the Third Wave. And I found the book to be really interesting because he talked about how the U.S. economy moved from an agricultural age or an agricultural period to an industrial period, and it was moving into what was going to be called the information period or age. And I thought back in the 70s it was cool when he was talking about things like cell phones and what became the internet. So today we want to talk about it because it's important to understand that this economy today is changing. And we really are now in the information age. And it's so much different than the industrial age. But understanding how this change occurs is going to help us understand why we need to learn about Excel, why we need to learn about the cloud, and how information systems is used. In the 1970s, Alvin Toffler discussed the third wave, and he talked about the movement of the economy from an industrial base to an information-based economy. We know in the industrial-based economy, everything's about manufacturing. And in fact, manufacturing has now moved overseas, and it has been replaced by information age and information technology. Let's talk for a minute. In the agricultural age, what assets made somebody wealthy? If you look at a list of a few things here: land, labor, crops. And by labor, I'm talking about slaves, livestock, and transportation. I've listed a couple of entrepreneurs. The first person here is Mr. Cuffy, who was part Native American. He was from the Pequot, Mashantucket Pequot tribal nation. And he was a shipbuilder and made his money in transportation by transporting goods made in the New World and shipping them back to England. Then we have here another gentleman who, I guess the best thing, he was a trapper and a hunter, and he ended up being one of the gentlemen that founded Chicago, the city of Chicago. We then moved into the industrial age. Let me ask you, what assets made somebody wealthy in the industrial age? Well, now it became factories, equipment, labor, and cash. I have a list here. If you'd like to take a look at it, this is a link to an article by Forbes magazine. Click here, in which they list 27 richest families in the world. Just to show you a couple of them. You have Walton, Koch family. If you get a chance, you may want to read through and look through some of these. Very interesting stuff that we have. Whoops, sorry about that. Wrong button. Okay. But that's a list here of wealthy industrialists. I have couple of pictures here. This is Carnegie. He made his money in steel. Henry Ford, automobiles. Here's C.J. Madam Walker, the first female millionaire. And Parks, who made Parks sausage. This is an example of some wealthy individuals from the industrial age. What's interesting, and we'll talk more about the shift from the agricultural age to the industrial age in another class. But one of the important things is that as we shifted from this agricultural age, where people were really connected to nature, they made stuff with their hands, of course they grew their own food. If they needed to get something, they made it. They made their own clothes, until we got to the industrial age, where you had mass production. So there was a disconnect in which people moved away from being connected to nature and being connected more to the factories and equipment and going to stores. So you had the development of grocery stores, what we call supermarkets, shopping centers, big retail outlets. Because as you manufactured all of these products, there had to be somewhere to sell them. If you can imagine, back in the agricultural age, there was no real manufacturing of large quantity of things. So they didn't have a need for stores. You didn't have a need for a lot of restaurants. People cooked and made their own food. So the industrial age brought about a lot of things that we still see today. Finally, we move into the information age. What makes someone wealthy? What kind of assets do they have? Well, now we're talking about broadband, software, hardware, virtual services like in the cloud, robots. These are things that are assets that make someone wealthy. Everybody knows about Bill Gates and Microsoft, but I could have added a lot more, such as Michael Dell, people who from Google, Yahoo. These are assets and businesses that people have that you didn't have in the industrial age, because we've moved now to this information age where computer technology, eventually robots, begin to take over. We'll talk later about the driverless car. More and more devices that are autonomous. I wanted to bring this up. When we moved from the agricultural age to the industrial age, something that occurred was the Great Depression. Then as we moved from the industrial age to the information age, we had the Great Recession. One thing I wanted to show is this chart shows income disparity between rich and poor. And you can see the blue includes the capital gains, and the excludes capital gains, and the red includes capital gains. But the thing I wanted to show you is that when the disparity got its highest, close to 50%, was in 1928, just before the Depression hit. And here it is again at 50%, just before the Great Recession. So income disparity, the difference in income between rich and poor, as it begins to spread out, that could be a leading indicator that the economy is getting ready to go through some hard times. Now, what defines a recession or depression? If you remember from economics, decline in gross domestic product, normally 2 months back to back of a decline in gross domestic product, gives us a recession. GDP is the total market value of all goods and services produced in a country in a given year. Remember, all that production comes from 4 different sources: consumer, business, import, export, and government. So as we went through the Great Recession in '08, you remember consumer spending went down, business spending went down. The government, when Obama got in office, he did try and take some government money and spend it on things, but to me, he just didn't do enough to offset what was lost from consumers and business. And then import, export was still coming along, especially imports, but they took a hit also. So if you look at the 4, when you had the recession, it was government that should have kicked in and spent a lot of money. But I want to show you this chart. It shows that recessions don't define depressions. Notice in the 1929, when the stock market crashed, you can see growth was negative for the next 4 or 5 years. This is especially true because President Hoover was in office, and he believed in austerity. It wasn't until 1932, when Roosevelt got in office, that he began to have the government spend money and the economy began to grow. You had a little dip there, but then again it took off going into the war. But it took, from 1929, it took almost 7 years to get back to where the economy was 7 years earlier. Right? Another way to look at it is if you look at 1929, you had the rise in the stock market and then the collapse. This is the Dow Jones Industrial Average from 1928 to 1954. But notice the Dow Jones almost got to 400, let's say maybe 380. And then the Great Depression kicked it all the way down to under 50. Since then, it's kind of come up and down. And now, it did not return back to its level of 1929, I'll say that's 1929, until 1954. Wow. That's 26 years it took for the Dow to come back. This time with the Great Recession, I remember when the stock market was down under, whoops. Oh boy. Let's exit full screen. And sorry about that. Okay. I remember Dow Jones back in '08, because I was in Connecticut at the time, went from 14,000 all the way down to maybe 6,500. And people were asking me, well, should I sell my stock? Should I get out of the stock market? And I told them no. As it was going down, that was the time to buy. Because look at what happened to the Dow. It came back within 3 years, it got back up to almost 14,000. And now we've shot past that. So when the economy was down, if you had money, you should have been buying stock all the way down. And then that way, as it takes back off, you make all that money. If we look at the Dow Jones Industrial Average from October of 1928 to December of 2013, notice how for a long time the Dow Jones average stayed pretty level from 1932 to 1954, 2 years before I was born, just stayed at the bottom. Then it slowly came back up, and then we had our Great Recession here, but it allowed us to regroup. And now, if you look at the Dow Jones, we're up over 16,000. So those people who kept kept the faith, they did okay. Here is a stock chart showing all the way 1902 all the way to 2012. And what it's showing, just in general, for those who are interested in the stock market or understand it, it's showing growth in the stock market, but each time we had a recession, it grew faster and grew faster and grew faster. Here's productivity. Notice how the productivity from 1900 to 2000, 100 years, workers' productivity has increased every year. And as long as you get worker productivity on a positive number, then the economy is growing and more jobs will be created. Increased productivity leads to a better standard of living, as I was saying earlier. By increasing productivity, people doing more with less, then the net effect is you end up with a better standard of living. And here's an example. The red line shows you life expectancy. In 1900, life expectancy for people was 46 years old, which meant, shoot, I'd have been dead 12 years ago. Now here we are in 2010, and we're up to 80.3. And that's what I want to do. I want to beat my grandfather, who was 82 years old. So it looks pretty good for me, if I can stay healthy. So not only did life expectancy go up significantly in the past 100 years, but also birth rates have dropped. Because as more and more people get educated, especially women, and they decide that they want to have careers and not necessarily just get married like back in the day and start having children. Both men and women are waiting longer to have children so that they can go ahead and get into their careers. Now, here's an example of something I like to show. This is an example of these economic ages we talked about and how they impact the school system. During the agricultural days, you had the one-room schoolhouse. This is interesting. You ever wonder why we have summers off for school, or why we have spring break, or why we have the Christmas holidays off? Well, spring break came about because back in the agricultural days, where everybody was in one room, they had to have a break so that they could plant or they could go out and harvest. But basically they did what? They planted during the spring, so that's what your spring break was. It wasn't to go to Daytona Beach. It was to go back and work with your parents on the farm. So that's what happened. We ended up with a school system that had spring break and then sometimes fall break as you had planting season. You had summers off because you needed to work on the farm. And then, of course, Christmas and New Year's you would take off. Eventually, people moved to the cities. And as they moved to the cities and children especially began to get crowded in, you couldn't use a one-room schoolhouse. So they developed the industrial age school system. In the industrial age, let's go back. In the industrial age, we decided instead of having one-room schoolhouse where everybody takes the same classes, we would educate children the same way we manufacture products. So it's like an assembly line. You come in in kindergarten, and you go year by year until you graduate from high school. During that period of time, they have bells for everything. They have bells when it's time to go to class, bells when class are over, bells when it's time to go eat, bells when it's time for gym. They just have bells, bells, bells. Why? Because they wanted to get you ready to work in the factory. See, once you finished high school, you could go work in the factory. Only certain children had the opportunity to go off to college. Everybody else, their job was to get back and work at the factory. So the agricultural age, the school systems were developed to let people know how they're supposed to work inside of a factory, with the bells telling you when you can eat, when to go to work, when to stop work, and what to do. And you gotta just go down an assembly line. Well, today, in the information age, there's so many ways in which we can educate children. Either in the classroom, we could do like we're doing now, pre-record classes, or we could have homeschooling, where you have homeschooling, and there's these websites like K12.com, where they have the curriculum and everything set up, and children can learn from home. So the question becomes, we have to upgrade the education system so that we can produce students for the information age. That's what this class is about. That's why I noticed we don't have bells telling us when you come into my class and when you leave. You can take this pre-recorded class whenever you want, and then you can take the exam associated with it. Not any way you want, but let's say after Thursday, or by Thursday morning, that exam will be up online, class marker, and you can take the exam. Now, could you imagine in an industrial school telling children they can come to school when they want? They can, the bell rings, don't worry about it. Well, in the information age, we don't need a bell. We don't need those kind of things. You get your lesson, you learn it. If you don't, you're out. You go to the next person. Here's a chart that shows the SAT scores versus spending per child. I think it's wrong. I think this is SAT scores, right? Because these boxes, these are SAT scores, and this is the spending per child. So the spending per child is going up, but SAT scores are going down. And what that is going to do is you're saying that you've got really an outdated system. You're pouring money into something that's not working. You're not getting these children educated. They don't have reasoning skills. They can't pass the SAT. They're probably smart enough, but they just haven't gotten their act together to be able to do well on SATs. So SATs are going down. They've kind of leveled off, creeped up a little bit. But look at the amount of dollars spent. This is what happens when you have a school system that was built for the industrial age, and then we're trying to retrofit it or use it for the information age. You spend more money, but it's inefficient. Economy over time. Let's look at, this is an interesting chart. If you look at the blue line, it shows farm productivity from 1910 to 1939. Less than 0.5% growth. When the industrial age came about, notice that the trend line went from less than 0.5% growth. We began to see a tremendous growth, almost 5 times the amount of growth in farm productivity as we introduced tractors, genetic livestock, pesticide, and irrigation to the farm. So this is interesting to understand, because when we move from one age to the next, we take the new technology and apply it to the same systems, and we get better productivity. So that's why now you get a variety of foods that when I was growing up, when I was your age, we never had. I mean, you have the same fruit year round. You have certain livestock that we'll talk later about that are genetically engineered, but it helps farm productivity. Here, if we're looking at manufacturing value added as output versus manufacturing employment, starting in 1950, output has steadily increased. Yet employment, which started up until about 1980, kept growing. Now it's on the way down. So how is it that we get more output with less people? Here's another chart. It's kind of hard to see a little bit, but the blue represents output, what's your productivity. This is electronic manufacturing, 1987 to 2009, just 22 years. The amount of product, well, let's put it this way. The blue represents the increase in output. The red is the reduction in labor. That's right. So we're getting more output with less people. Again, we're applying, remember the internet came about this time. So notice how we get that bend curve, just as people were really getting into the internet. And we saw also the system able to produce more. So production shot up, employment went down. We had the internet and World Wide Web right about there. So my question is, where are the jobs? If here's in green the job employment on the farm. See, it's almost gone down to zero. Manufacturing, which got up pretty high, eventually now is on the way down. The only jobs that we have are purple here and the red ones. So we're losing farm jobs, we're losing manufacturing jobs, but we're growing. Well, these are low wage jobs right here, is growing. So that's the people working at Walmart, McDonald's, those types of jobs. This demand is growing. But people who are in the service area, their jobs are growing, but just not as fast. This is the area that you're talking about. Where are the jobs? Right here. Learn what we're talking about in class or in this course. Learn about the Excel and how to make it work for you. And this is where the middle class that you're hoping to become, if you're not already there, but to become is right here. Not here, but right here. If we look back at gross domestic product, going all the way back to 1900, notice every year there's been some ups and downs, but basically it's gone up. So even though we're losing jobs, the economy is getting stronger and stronger and stronger because of productivity gains. Next, I want to talk about, as we move into this information age, data versus information versus knowledge. The jobs of the past were database jobs, like bookkeeper. I have a friend who is a medical bill encoder, but you can't find a job because the computers begin to do more and more of that. Information takes the raw facts of data and makes it understandable. So, in the past, we had people who were bookkeepers. Now you can get something like QuickBooks or Quicken. It can be your bookkeeper. And what you need to do is take that data and turn it into information. So from a financial standpoint, if we were doing your your taxes for the year, we would take all the receipts you have, organize them, and put the receipts of your raw facts, and put that into some kind of understandable information, and then you provide it to the person who's going to help you find a solution, or maybe in my case, probably help me go up to Alabama. Because the jobs of the future, if the jobs in the past were bookkeepers, then the jobs of the future are CPA. This is output from basketball game. The Celtics versus the Grizzlies. And notice nowadays they keep track of everything that goes on in that game. So I would look at this information as the raw data. As you can see, it talks about Ray Allen, Rondo. I guess they played O'Neal, he's getting a lot of rebounds. Garnett, Allen. Here is Gasol, and who else do they have? I don't really know too many more of these people. But anyway, they had a pretty good team that year, though. But this is the raw data. We then take that raw data and we turn it into organized information, sort of like the box score. Right? So if you look at it, you go back at this data, you put that data together, and you have information. And that's what people like to see. They like to see this data. They don't, like me, I don't want to see that stuff. I'll wait to make sure that he brings home something for me to check it out. So, information. Once we get that data, we turn it into information like this here, which is the box score. And then from this information, we can make decisions. And that decision is known as your knowledge base. So if we look here, we can see percentage of field goals, team rebounding, and we can see that the Boston Celtics out-rebounded them and shot better at the free throw line, shot better at 3-point, and shot better at 2-point. So I would suspect Boston probably won that game, which they did, 98-80. Right? So you can see the points. But looking at it this way is a lot easier than looking at it this way. Okay, let's move forward. So now my question is, high-paying jobs now include how to use information systems to increase productivity and decision-making. That's what Excel is about. How do you increase productivity and how do you increase decision-making? So you have to become a knowledge worker. That's what this class is going to teach. The economy has moved away from the farm, went to the factory, and now it's in the cloud. So my question to you is, what's next? After we talk about the information age, are robots part of the information age, or are they something new? And what about space travel? So they're both interesting things to talk about, but not in this class. Let's jump back here a little bit. As we said, data is raw facts, information makes data understandable, and then knowledge is finding solutions for that information. Okay, what I'd like to do, finish with this class. This is kind of an overview of the agricultural age to the information age. Next Monday, I have another pre-recorded class where we're going to just concentrate on the movement from the industrial age to the information age. I hope in this class I was able to show you that there's some similarities when we move from one age to the next, but then we have to get ready for these jobs. These are the educated jobs. Notice we don't need quite as many, but the manual jobs we don't need it hardly all. Neither factories. And we're going to begin to work on these two. These are the low-wage jobs, and then these are management jobs. Okay. Farm productivity, this is a good chart because again it shows that if we infuse, in this case, industrial revolutionary technology to the farm, we significantly increase productivity, farm productivity. So I think it's important to understand that. Now, as we begin to add information technology, we're going to see farm productivity become, this kind of line slopes even more as the farm becomes even more productive. So let's see. That's on the floor. I'm going to go back. Oh, come on. Okay. All right. Well, don't forget to make sure you watch this video, this pre-recorded class, kind of a basic class, and then on Thursday, this will appear in the blog today, or let's say Wednesday, and then I'm going to want you to take an exam, which starts on Thursday, and is based on the information that we've learned or watched in this video. So I'd like to thank you very much, and again, I'll be back in class next Wednesday. Next Monday, we have another pre-recorded class where we're going to look at the industrial age to the information age. That'll be Monday, and then Wednesday, I'll begin to talk about risk. So thank you very much. I also remember I put a copy of this PowerPoint presentation directly onto the website, so that if you want to review the PowerPoint presentation before you take the exam, you can do that.